Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Josh Bressers. I'm Red Hat's security product manager for the platform group, and it's my job to do kind of the security strategy and messaging and kind of figuring out, what's going on with security in that space. And today, I'm going to talk about Red Hat security in a post-Shellshock world. I'm sure all of us have had a wild year, to say the least. I know I certainly have. And so, let's talk about security. But before I go on, I always want to kind of talk about some of the terms I'm going to use and some of the things I'm going to say. I know that in all the years I've been doing this job, I've been in security for, it's been almost 20 years now. It's longer than I can remember, honestly. And it's easy for security people to assume everyone else knows what you're talking about. And I know that some of you might be security experts, some of you might not be. And so rather than assume anything, we'll just cover some things quickly. And of course, if there's something you don't understand, stop and ask, right? I'm here for you guys, so I don't want to just keep rambling on forever without anyone knowing what's going on. And so I can't see that screen well, so I'll step over here. All right, so first up, issues, and I'm going to say flaws and vulnerability. Those three words are going to mean the same thing. And when I say that, I'm talking about security bugs, right? Things like Heartbleed was a security flaw, Shellshock was a security flaw. There's Poodle, CCS, all those named things, but then there's also things that don't get fancy names in those. So anytime issue, flaw, vulnerability, I'm talking about a bug that has security implications. CVE, that's obviously things with CVE IDs ideally are security issues. However, if it gets a CVE ID, it might not be a security issue. It gets all kind of complicated. MITRE hands them out rather freely, and then it's up to the vendors and the projects and people like me to go to them and say, I disagree with you. And of course, then they note our disagreement, and we all move on happily. So exploits are the things that the bits of code that like bits of code that exploit the flaw, right? They're basically you're exercising the bug somehow, right? Sometimes people write applications that exercise a bug. Sometimes, like in the case of Shellshock, it was extremely trivial to exercise that from just typing it in on your keyboard. But that is, some of them might get you root, for example. Some of them are just demos that crash your system or just kind of show off what's going on. So if you hear the word demo exploit, I'll likely say that at some point. That means this is an exploit that proves the bug, but doesn't go so far as causing it to do whatever horrible thing it could be done, as in root shells and things such as that. Embargo, an embargo is a secret security bug. We talk a lot about embargoes lifting and public dates, and what we mean there is not all the time, but sometimes a researcher, possibly Red Hat or someone else, would find a security issue, and we decide it's bad enough that we will tell other vendors, we will tell open source projects, you create a small group of people, and you have an embargo, which means only that group knows what it is, and there's generally rules around that in terms of what you can say to who and who can share information and what can be shared and things like that. But the idea is that gives us time to prepare the updates and to understand the issue before it goes public, because as I'll describe in a little while, sometimes embargoes don't work correctly and things get weird. And that some of the insanity of the last year was due to that, in fact. Attacker, the attacker, hackers, crackers, pick a word, whatever you want to call it. That's essentially the bad guy we're dealing with there. Security researchers are not attackers or bad guys, so please don't let me think that or let me insinuate that in any way for you folks. So they're the good guys, we work with them. Security updates, that is the patch for the issue. That is an RHSA, for example, when Red Hat distributes our security updates come in that manner. Security updates can come in many, many forms. For example, upstreams will produce just a source code patch file sometimes. Red Hat produces generally RPMs. We have zip files and some other things as well, of course, but it just varies by your vendor, right? I'm sure everyone has applied security updates in the past. If you haven't, then I'm sorry for you. Something horrible is going to happen to you. Ratings, so Red Hat, we use the Microsoft scale, low, moderate, important, and critical. You'll see that on all of our RHSAs. We assign them, that's the severity of the issue, and there's some metrics around how we come to that conclusion, and those are published on the internet. I won't cover them in depth here. There's also something CVSS version 2, which is a numerical score assigned to this stuff. We don't really use them a ton. We mostly publish them because other organizations such as NVD publish them, and we may disagree with them. We usually do. And so rather than try to convince them to fix it, we just publish our own. So obviously, our goal is to do this. We try not to weasel out of these things. We try to be as honest as we can. I often say when I speak of open source security that the emperor is naked. It's all there. We can't get out of anything. It's all there. Anyone can look at it and figure out what's going on. Breaches are when the attackers often use an exploit. You can start getting deep here. But basically, a breach is when you've got the bad guy breaks in, steals the information, whatever. There's lots of things that go on. I'm sure that today I could ask you guys to name 3 breaches, and you could all probably name 5. And I bet a year or 2 ago you couldn't name any. And so it's been wild. Things like various large organizations, or as recently OPMs have been in the news from the government. And so that's what I'm talking about there, right, where the bad guys kind of go in and they do something. It's, quite frankly, these days, it's generally organized crime in a way where it's huge industry, right? There's so much to be gained by doing this stuff. A leak is where the information escapes. I'm sure all of us could name several large information leaks, say of classified information to the outside world. And so that's kind of what that is. We won't talk about that too much today. And risk and threat is the big one that I'll probably screw up too. Most people get them wrong. A risk is something you do, something you control. A threat is something you don't control. My best example there is kind of like the traffic in Boston is the threat, right? I'm sure we've all been out walking on the streets. I always tell people that the only 2 cities I look both ways when I cross the street are London and Boston. And so the threat, obviously, is a thing we can't control. It's just there, it's present. But the risk are the decisions we make that dictate how the threat affects us. For example, if I walk down the middle of the street, I'm going to die. Whereas, obviously, if I walk on the sidewalk, that's much less risky than something like that, for example. So, this year has been ridiculous, and I think everyone can agree with that. I have a story. When I was a kid, who remembers those machines at the grocery store? You put the quarter in and you spin the crank and you get the little ball out, right? It's got the prize inside of it. Yeah. In fact, I took my kids to the store and I didn't get anything I was happy with at the machine. So I remember when I was a kid, we'd always go to the grocery store with my mom. There's one of those machines. Of course, we cried and begged and we had to have something out of the machine or our life would be terrible. And one day she finally cracked and let us get our prize out of the machine. And I got a digital watch. Now, back when I was a kid, that was kind of a big deal. Right? Like digital watches weren't something everyone had. And I remember thinking, this is fantastic. How awesome is this to have a digital watch? And I've gotten nothing even close to that for the rest of my life out of these machines, right? It's always, I think the ball is worth more than whatever's inside of it in most situations. And I think this year has kind of been like that. We started the year with Heartbleed and Shellshock, and I wouldn't say it's been downhill from there, but I think due to those 2 things and the insane press they got and quite frankly, the reality of the situation and how serious they were, I think we now expect everything to be on fire anytime there's something security going on. And so that's one of the things we're going to talk about now is how we can understand what's going on, how we can identify, is it serious, is it not serious, and what's Red Hat doing about this, right? Because obviously we were not prepared for the year that came. But now we're in pretty good shape these days. We've done a lot of work, we've done a lot of great stuff, and I'm very proud of everything that Red Hat's done to get us where we are today. All right, so the year everything's on fire, the named issues, we've got a whole bunch of them, I bet. Come on, guys. All right, Shellshock and Heartbleed, what else we got? Who can name an issue? There you go. Right, I mean, a year ago, if I asked you guys to talk about security issues, I bet most people couldn't have done it, right? It's kind of one of those things that I used to always say, I wish everyone paid more attention to security, right? Why don't people pay attention to security? I've got Dan Walsh in front of me here with SE Linux, right? Why is everyone turning off SE Linux? Why doesn't anyone pay attention? Why don't they listen to us? We know what we're talking about. And now they kind of are, and it's created a lot of work, actually, and right. Yeah, careful what you wish for, guys. Excuse me. All right, so the named issues, we're going to spend some time talking about those. I'll never forget that when Heartbleed came out, my mom called me on the phone and said, do you know anything about this Heartbleed thing? Now, I've been doing security work for darn near 20 years, and my mother has never asked me a single question about my job. And so I thought, this is the real deal, right? What's going on? You know it's bad when your mom calls you about a security issue. And so Heartbleed it's not the first named issue, mind you. There is something called the Morris worm. Has anyone heard of the Morris worm before? A couple hands. So the Morris worm was back in, was it 85? I think it was early 80s, right? The internet was a pretty new and hip thing, of course, and there was a fellow named Morris, I've forgotten his first name now off the top of my head, but he wrote a worm that basically shut down the internet. If it didn't infect your machine, you shut it off because you didn't want it to infect your machine. And it was obviously a super huge deal. I suspect today it would be, you know, trillions of dollars in damage if something like that happened. Back in the day, it was mostly universities and research institutions, and not that that wasn't damaging to them, but I mean, the internet was nothing like it is today. And so that was possibly one of the first named issues. So this isn't new, right? It's not like the guys who thought up Heartbleed were the first people to give something a name. But I think Heartbleed is the one that really brought this kind of to the forefront and gave it attention. And does everyone know what a CVE ID is? Yeah, sure, maybe not. So a CVE ID is something, there's an organization called MITRE that they created a standard, the Common Vulnerability Enumeration. It's basically a unique identifier for all security issues. And as I said earlier, sometimes not security issues. And the idea is, it is easier to say CVE ID, blah, 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 2015 dash whatever, than it is to say, oh, that bug in bash. Because that doesn't mean anything to people, whereas we can give it a unique ID, and people get that, right? That's easy to understand. So anyway, and named issues, some of them got fancy logos, right? I'm sure. In fact, I carved the Heartbleed logo into my pumpkin at Halloween. I should have put a picture of it up there. It turned out really well, I thought. And then the marketing, right? This is something that's new to us. We aren't used to having marketing people driving some of these messages in terms of security. We were just used to security issues show up, we deal with a security issue, we move on to the next security issue. And that's clearly not the case anymore, because when you're paying a marketing department to kind of play up your issue, their job is to make sure it doesn't die, right? They want to keep it going. And now I'm not opposed to named issues, mind you. So if I sound negative, it's just like the horrible pain inside of me that I can't get rid of right now. But this isn't a bad thing, right? Because like Heartbleed was serious. It got people's attention. Shellshock was serious. It got people's attention. This is not a bad thing that this is being done. Excuse me. So when Heartbleed happened, this is basically the order of issues that have most recently happened. Logjam was not too long ago. Venom, of course, was not long ago either. When Heartbleed happened, Red Hat was unprepared, to say the least, for what was coming. It was a big deal, and we didn't think people were going to care this much. We had, you know, customers caring, you had the press caring, you had all kinds of people, you know, mothers caring, and grandmothers, I'm sure, asking what's going on. And so Heartbleed was really what kind of started it off, and I believe it was right before the last summit, I think, was when Heartbleed kind of happened. And I'll never forget it, because one of the unique things was, at the time, the fellow who I reported to, Mark Cox, who's the head of the product security team at Red Hat, he was actually on vacation, which made things horrible for him, because he's also involved with the OpenSSL upstream. So he not only had all the Red Hat people calling him, he had all the OpenSSL people calling him, asking him, you know, what's going on. So the big thing we did with Heartbleed was, after a while, and we realized people were asking questions and knowing what was going on, we created a Labs app, which is, if you guys haven't seen, there's Red Hat Access Labs. You can access it from, I think if you just log into the portal, you can get to them. And we've put up a handful of tests for a lot of these named issues. And we put up a lab app, and we thought, you know, is anyone going to care about this? And it turned out you guys loved it. The customers went nuts, and they thought it was fantastic. And again, though, this was kind of the victim of our own success, because now every time one of these things comes up, we've got people, when's the lab coming out? And some of these issues did not lend themselves to having lab apps. So sometimes it becomes a challenge to make sure we understand what's going on and we message it properly. And I'll get to that at Shellshock, actually. I have a funny story about the lab app. So anyway, we did the lab app, and we realized that we needed to coordinate better, because generally the security people did their thing, we released our update, and then whatever, no big deal. But now we have a lab app, we have people talking to each other, things are trying to work out, and we're kind of figuring out how it's all going to work out. And so CCS injection was next. CCS injection was not a huge deal. It didn't get a ton of attention. It had some goofy logo. It's on the next slide. I'll get to it. And it was a man-in-the-middle issue, right? Man-in-the-middle issues are really hard to exploit. It's not one of those things where, like with Heartbleed, you've got anyone with access to the internet could exploit Heartbleed against you if you're vulnerable, right? So man-in-the-middle is a little different. And we did put a lab app together with CCS injection. We also had a nice blog article explaining what's going on, which was kind of new for us. And the reason we did that is because we got wind of CCS early. It was an embargoed issue from OpenSSL. And then, so we figured it out, right? We sat down and said, what is actually going on here? Let's understand the issue. Let's make sure we have good information so when customers come to us, when the press comes to us, when other Red Hat folks come to us, we know what's going on. And there was a lab app, of course, which we did, and so that worked out nicely. Poodle came out next. In that one, we kind of got a little farther along, where this time we made sure we had knowledge base articles ready, we had a blog article ready, we had our advisories ready, and Poodle was extra unique because Poodle, you couldn't fix Poodle. The problem with Poodle was it was a protocol downgrade issue, and it was just one of those things you had to get rid of the old protocol, right? There was no way to do anything else other than that. And so that was a unique challenge, obviously, we had to message. And with Poodle was when Red Hat started. We created a group that, I don't think I've written the name down. We have a group inside Red Hat now that basically when these things start happening, we get together and we pull in all the important people. We have a group in CEE, which is Marco's organization. You all saw him at the keynote this morning. But the idea is there's these people called critical escalation managers in CEE, and their job is to basically be in the middle of the mess, and all the people who need to work together around them, then we use them as kind of our funnel, and it worked beautifully. They're fantastic. I couldn't be happier with dealing with them. But that was kind of a big deal, was putting that group together. We've never before, in terms of security response at Red Hat, had a formal group that would come together and start dealing with this stuff appropriately. That way we could make sure we were ready. And so I'm glad we had it, because then Shellshock happened. Shellshock is the craziest thing I've ever seen in my life. And the story on this is absolutely fascinating. So what happened was Shellshock was an issue in Bash, and if you sent a certain string to Bash, essentially, you could get it to execute any code you wanted, and you could accomplish this through things like when you had a CGI application listening to a web server, you could execute code on the web server, for example. There are most people don't realize this either, but things like you've got your DHCP client executes code through Bash, right? That's how it runs some of the commands. And so if you connected to a malicious access point, you could get bad things to happen with Shellshock. Excuse me. And so what happened was this issue was embargoed, and we had the Bash upstream guy was contacted by a researcher, and then he said, I want Debian to coordinate this. And now the guy who does the Debian security work also worked for Red Hat, and I said, all right, man, just, whatever, Debian, Red Hat, I don't care what hat you have on, we just need to make sure this gets done. And so he started looking at it, and he realized that, okay, this patch isn't complete. It technically fixes the issue, but it's one of those things that there are going to be more similar issues, and this patch only fixes the one singular problem. And so he said, hey, upstream, why don't we fix it excuse me, this way, and that's more complete. But it did kind of break the way Bash functions worked. And upstream said, no, let's just fix this one thing, and then we'll sit down and we'll fix it correctly later, right? We don't want to screw people up. We want to understand what's going on, and let's make sure we do it right. So we said, all right. And so we get our updates ready, we got our blog post ready, we know what's going on, and we release it, and not 2 hours after this goes public, another researcher basically said, oh, hey, look, I found a variant of this if you just do this instead. And this is what we were worried was going to happen, and it did. And that's obviously when all hell broke loose, because now you've got a patch for customers that doesn't fix the issue completely, and then we have to decide, what do we do now, right? What are we going to do with this patch? We need another patch. And we decided as Red Hat that, all right, we're going to take the complete patch, we're going to basically diverge from upstream, and we're going to do it the way we want to do it, because we know that there's going to be more to come after this. And so we took our patch, we applied it. In fact, many other Linux distributions ended up taking our patch. Not right away, though. because what happened was we released our updates, and this was, I think it took maybe 24 or 48 hours after that. So we were telling customers, we've got another one coming, this other one, and it was a pain in the ass, right? I'm sure you guys all know, you were dealing with it. Which patch do you apply? What do you do? And this is a place, Red Hat, we learned a lot of lessons about messaging and how we can better deal with this stuff and how we should better communicate to the outside world. And so we understand what we need to do now, and hopefully we never have another issue like this. But anyway, so we released our second patch, which I'm sure made all of you guys extremely pleased with us. And then shortly after that, another researcher found another issue because Bash, again, only fixed that one singular problem with their patch. And then, of course, another issue right after that. And these researchers are probably sitting on this just waiting because they know what's going on. But he releases it. And, of course, we were fine. Red Hat was OK because our patch fixed it. And that's when everybody else took Red Hat's patch and they applied it, because then more things were found after that. And that's when it was decided, this is whack-a-mole. There's no way we can do anything with this. And so it was, I think the biggest lesson we walked away with is listen to the security dudes. Like, they're not just crazy. They know what they're talking about. And then throughout the year, we had something called Turla, which was claimed to be an APT malware that targeted Linux. It turned out it may have been a slight threat, but it was neither advanced nor persistent. And that's one of those instances where Red Hat, we spent some time to understand what's going on. We made sure everything was OK, because obviously if it was a big deal, then we would have figured out what to do past that. But luckily it wasn't. Grinch came out right around Christmas time. That was some researcher decided that the written, documented policy on the way we have a local administrator is able to install packages without a password. That was a decision we made, and they decided that was a security issue, so that kind of turned into a mess. And that was, I think, 2 or 3 days right before Christmas, which, of course, we all love having emergencies right before Christmas time, right? That, yeah, makes everything better. Ghost came out. Ghost we did okay with, I think. We had a nice blog. We understood the issue. We were careful not to pull everyone in too early because, of course, at the same time, when an issue gets a name, I remember I went to the guy who runs the critical escalation managers, and I said, there's another security issue. And the first thing he said was, what's its name? And I thought, oh, this is not a good precedent to set. But Ghost we did pretty good. We took things easy. We did it right, I think, and it turned out well. I really can't complain too much. If you guys have any complaints, by all means, let me know. But I was happy with that. Freak came out. That was proof old ciphers are bad. Then Venom came out, which was old code. That was floppy driver code in the QEMU KVM hypervisor, which how many of us have used floppy drives, right? Those things are long gone. Yeah, none of us are admitting it, though, right? So it's the lesson there we need to take away with, and this is something we need to keep in mind going forward, of course, is that there's a lot of old code in some of this stuff. And Bash was the same story, right? Bash was, the Shellshock thing was very, very old code that, quite frankly, people had even forgotten was there. And basically, a researcher looked at it one day and was like, holy crap, look what I could do. And I mean, Venom was the same deal, right? We got this old code. And so one of the things we need to start doing is investigating, what's old code? What do we need to look at? What needs to go away? I mean, things like, we don't need floppy support anymore. And so we're going to sort that out. Then Logjam happened. And Logjam was, excuse me, another issue with TLS, SSL downgrade attacks. And it was for using the old export ciphers in SSL. And that, again, kind of brings up the question, why the hell haven't we taken this old crypto out of this stuff? And so that's something we're going to start figuring out in the future, is we need to understand, what is some of this old stuff? Historically speaking, we'd be like, oh, there's old ciphers, no big deal. But it kind of is a big deal. And so we're going to deal with that and understand what it means. So there's a picture here. I stole this from Mark Cox. He actually used it in a little lightning talk he did yesterday downstairs. But it's on the Red Hat security blog. There are issues that matter. There's issues that are branded, and obviously not all the branded issues matter. And so that's a nice picture there of, obviously, Heartbleed, Shellshock, and Ghost. Those ones were fairly serious, and those were things we needed to worry about. But then not all of them have logos, because you got Poodle, Turla, Grinch, and Freak, no logos. CCS Injection had a logo. But so you kind of get the idea. Just because something gets a fancy name doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a super serious issue and something we need to deal with right away. Now, additionally, there's some other issues over there. Apache Struts, glibc was a thing with name resolution. JBoss, remote execution, and RPM flaws. RPM being obviously the package manager that Red Hat uses, and there were a bunch of issues that involved having unsigned packages do bad things with your system. Obviously, the idea is if you have an unsigned package, nothing horrible should be able to come of it if you know it's unsigned. But again, though, it was serious from the perspective that it's not okay for untrusted content to do things, but at the same time, it was something you had to run by hand. It was not an issue if you were using Red Hat Network, Yum, and things like that, right? So. And again, if you want a nice version of this, securityblog.redhat.com. It's a couple stories back at this point, I think, but it's got a proper resolution and all that stuff. All right, so we talked about the past, kind of what's going on. So now, what are we doing now, okay? And this kind of comes back to, I talked about the critical escalation managers and how we all started working together. And obviously, anytime you've got a security update, or really any update in general that's coming from Red Hat, there's a group of people that need to get involved, because there's the developers obviously create the patch, there's QE that's going to do our testing for us, you've got the documentation guys, actually we've got Sam Newth right here who's in charge of the docs people, so if there's something you don't like, you go yell at that guy. Then there's security people that our job is to kind of figure out what's going on, understand, write the advisories, make sure everything makes sense, and we kind of see ourselves as the ringleaders in all this stuff, as if someone else isn't getting it done, it's our job to make sure it happens. So the support guys, obviously, when you say have something like Shellshock and the phones start ringing off the hook, excuse me, you have someone to call, ask questions, they know what's going on. Communications people, lots of news stories that come out about this stuff. That's one of the fun things. I don't know if fun's necessarily the word, but I've talked to a lot of reporters over the last year. And sometimes it's okay, but sometimes, after you've been doing it for 10 hours straight, it can get a little tiring. And then, there it is, the CEE CVE Security Response Planning Group. That is the name of the group that was created inside CEE, which is what, a customer experience and engagement? Okay, I get the two E's backwards a lot. But anyway, so that's the group that was put together, and they're the guys who kind of, whenever one of these things happen, the group gets spun up, and it's not just CEE. A lot of the people are from CEE. This is basically, we take in all these people from all over the company, and we get everyone working together, we get everyone on the same page. And of all the lessons we learned throughout all this is that communication, right? I'm sure we can all stand here and talk about, communication all day long, but I mean, obviously, communication is the key, and this group is how we solved it. Because without that communication, this stuff just doesn't happen. I mean, I'm sure we could all tell horror stories of communication going terribly wrong in our organization, and goodness knows I have more than I'd like to have. But yeah, these guys are doing great, and I've kind of put that little quote up there. During an emergency, everyone's a security person. So we show up and we ask for help, and everyone helps. There's no questions asked, and that's one of the awesome things about Red Hat. We don't, I know Jim talks about this in his book, but things like, we don't have people saying, oh, I report over here to this guy. No, if we show up and say, I need your help on this horrible security thing, that's it. They're going to help us out, and it's fantastic. And that's one of the things I've absolutely loved about the whole experience, other than the insane stress and terrible deadlines and all of that, not sleeping. It's just, working with all the folks. It's been fantastic. Excuse me. All right, so the new things, we're never going to have bug-free code. I don't know how many of you are developers or have written any code, but there are few things you can write today that would be bug-free. And there's even people joking about Hello World sometimes, but I guarantee you there are probably versions of Hello World that have bugs. It's the unfortunate reality. As long as human beings write software, software is going to have bugs. I always like to tell people that I look forward to the day the machines finally can take over, because they will hopefully write bug-free code. But even that, I'm unsure about. And then, on top of bug-free code, and here's where things start getting kind of horrible. This is redhat.com in 1996, right? That's pretty wild looking there. I bet the brand people are really happy I put that up. Anyway, so if you look, that's probably an HTML page, right? There's nothing there. It was running, no doubt, on probably a computer under someone's desk, if I had to guess. And there's no complexities, no big deal, right? But things continue to get crazy. I can't even imagine what it took to render that page. It was probably thousands of lines of goodness knows what language, and then it does cool stuff, right? You scroll around and things move all crazy, and it's pretty cool looking. I mean, the web browser is more complicated, all of it. And so As we increase this complexity, especially from the security perspective, we're adding bugs, we're adding more bugs, and we're adding bugs faster than we were in the past because just the complexity. My favorite example is, so I said about Hello World, right? How many of you have written a Hello World application in, say, C or Perl or Python? Maybe what? 3 lines max, maybe. You know, and some you can get away with 1. Have you ever, how many people have done, say, an Android application before? Done any mobile development? So if you use an Android development studio to create an Android application, you literally need thousands of lines just to print Hello World on your screen. You know, and think about that for a few minutes. And even when you compile Hello World, it's not really 3 lines of C code. The C compiler takes your 3 lines, and then it goes out to the linker and all the libraries, and it pulls in tons of stuff to make that happen. In fact, there's a blog post I read from some researcher one time that he wanted to write Hello World without using any of the standard C library. And he obviously pulled it off using assembly, but it was really interesting to see what you have to do, what the modern operating system gives us to work with that we just take for granted every day. But again, while that's exciting and while it lets us do more things, it lets us do things faster, it adds complexity and it can create problems. And so that's something we need to keep in mind, and it's something we need to pay attention to. And then the third thing you need to think of, and never forget this, we will never fix all the security bugs. I mean, even if we wanted to, they will never all be fixed. We're never going to fix all the bugs. We're never going to fix all the security bugs. I've been doing security response at Red Hat for 11 years. And 10 years ago when I was doing this work, we had more bugs than we could honestly deal with from a security perspective. It was, now granted, when I say more bugs, I'm not saying Red Hat's throwing away a bunch of bugs, just not fixing them. There's obviously, with that scale we have, low, moderate, important, and critical, there's always a lot of crappy, stupid bugs that you're just not going to deal with, right? Send it upstream, we'll get it the next time. And so today, the graph, I didn't make one, but if you graph like the CVE IDs that have been coming out over recent years, the graph is growing at an alarming rate. And so there are more security issues today than there were yesterday, and there's going to be way more in the future. It's just the reality of it. In fact, MITRE, the organization that does CVE, they recently changed the CVE naming standard, where historically it was CVE, the 3 letters, literally, dash, year, 2015 in this case, or I think back 1998 or 97 is when it started, dash, 4 digits, right? They ran out of digits, as you can imagine. It's like Y2K sort of thing, right? How could you, we'll never have 10,000 CVE IDs. And so the first suggestion for the standard was, well, let's just go to 6 digits. And we thought, no, because if we do that in like 10 years, we're going to be right back here. You know, it's going to be a giant pain in the neck again. So now the CVE standard allows for infinite digits, which is comforting in a way because I know we never have to do this again, but it's terrifying as well because we know that there's going to be plenty more things we have to deal with. And so what do we do about the new normal, right? These, you know, taking into account the 3 things, the 3 laws, I don't know what you call them, that we just said, right? So we know we can't fix everything, but containment, right? Things like SE Linux, containers, virtualization. That's the future. Those are the things we're going to do. I mean, containers are my favorite example, is with containers, you have a singular use case. You know it's going to happen. You know it's going to be in them. And so you don't, if you have a web browser running in a container, if it starts sending email, there's something wrong, right? We know that. That's a given. Today, that's not always true because, I mean, I'm sure lots of us have servers that do lots of different things, and everyone keeps SE Linux on, right? Right? Yeah, no, you don't. But that's where containers are going to shine for us, right? We're going to be able to do things like take SE Linux, make the policy very understood. If you have a web browser, we can use SE Linux to make sure your web browser can't send mail, right? Stuff like that. That's really, containment is going to be the key. Automation is going to be really important for us. We currently, today at Red Hat, we have various static code analysis tools we run. You know, things like Coverity is a good example. There's Clang. There's a bunch of others I can't remember off the top of my head. But things like that is an easy way to get an idea of what's in your code. Now, I don't know, have any of you guys run Coverity ever on the source code that you have? It gets interesting when you run it. It returns a lot of false positives, right? And so obviously they're improving their tool constantly, but then we're paying attention to what's going on. It's an easy way to look at the results and say, all right, this returned lots and lots of stuff, so we know this is code we need to pay attention to, whereas some of the cleaner things might not be so bad. excuse me, testing, obviously, we are working on more robust test suites when we're dealing with things. TLS is my favorite example today. We need an extremely comprehensive test suite to really just beat the crap out of TLS because, let's face it, there's going to be more problems. Let's find as many as we can now versus waiting. And mitigations. Mitigations are things like Stack Protector, which is something built into GCC and glibc. It's where you can make your compiler and your kernel and various libraries can do intelligent things to help make sure that some of these exploits aren't quite so bad, and they make things much better. There's System Tap. I don't know if any of you guys have heard of System Tap before, but in fact for Venom, when Venom came out, we unfortunately found this out a couple days later, but the guy who does System Tap for Red Hat, he wrote a System Tap patch that basically made Venom moot, right? It watched for access to the floppy drive in the QEMU process and then just made nothing happen. That's awesome, right? I mean, that's the sort of stuff, that's where it's at. It's not about just constantly patching things. And additionally, K-Patch is coming. I don't know if you guys, if everyone went to the roadmap on RHEL yesterday, but K-Patch was brought up. That's going to give us the ability to apply kernel updates to a running system, which obviously from none of us like downtime, right? So once we can start doing things like that, we can apply kernel updates in real time and not have to power off and reboot, which that's going to be fantastic. I can't wait for that. But of course, that in itself, you know, again, complexity adds new things. We have to pay attention to it, understand what's going on. Okay, so now there's, what can you guys do, right? This isn't just about me talking. There's certain things. First of all, you know, prepare. The first line there says know how to get and apply patches. And I'm not trying to make fun of anyone here, but we found out that when Shellshock happened, there were a lot of customers who'd never actually applied any security updates before, and they didn't know what to do. And I mean, it's easy to laugh at, right? But like, I get that, right? Because we all have our own priorities, and that might not have been something you were necessarily worried about. And so if you don't know today how to apply updates from Red Hat, please figure it out and understand what to do. Because as much as it hurts me to say it, there's going to be more issues that we have to deal with. It will never end, unfortunately. It's just, it's the new reality. Mails from Red Hat, something we started doing with the last couple serious issues, is we are sending mails directly to customers. If you have an account with us through the portal, we will look at the entitlements you have, and if you're using one of the products, we had some issues with OpenStack at one point where we needed to alert customers about an important OpenStack update, and so we mailed them directly because that's obviously an easy way to get attention. We have a knowledge base. The knowledge base is fantastic. I don't know if anyone's ever looked at that. It's wonderful. Sam's guys work on it. They curate it. They make sure the content's relevant. And what we've done is for all these horrible named issues, we've been making a point of having good knowledge base content up. The knowledge base should be considered the definitive source from Red Hat. If you're wondering what we're doing, check that first, because it's quite likely that the question you have is going to be there. Our goal is to always update that as soon as we learn something new, which is obviously an easy thing for you guys to pay attention to. Trusted sources is a big deal. I did an interview for one of these issues, and I don't remember which one it is now, but the reporter asked me, they said, you know, how bad is this really? And I said, okay, here's the deal. And I explained what's going on, and I said, this is actually, it's something you need to pay attention to, but it's not the end of the world. And so the reporter quotes me, and then right after that, it was a security vendor said, I would expect Red Hat to downplay the issue in this manner. And I'm like, oh, cripes, you know? And so, of course, you know, everyone has their own priorities. Everyone's looking to do their own thing. And quite frankly, sometimes things, they apply differently to different groups, right? But Red Hat, we try very, very hard. We pride ourselves on being honest and open about what we're doing. We do not get weaselly. In fact, excuse me, in the past, there have been times with open source, we can't say this isn't an issue, or we can't ignore certain issues. The code's there, anyone can look. And more than once, we've wished we didn't have to admit some of the silly mistakes we've made and had to, you know, fix them and then admit to doing it. Whereas if it was not open, we might have been able to kind of weasel our way out of it. But we try very hard. And if you ever think that we've said something that you don't like, talk to us, because it's quite likely we either made a mistake or there's some sort of misunderstanding. We try really, really hard to be honest and open and truthful and lay it out the way it is. We're not trying to fool anybody. We're not trying to make things sound worse or better than they are. So, and additionally, there's other trusted sources, right? It's not just us. Figure out what works for you, figure out who you like, know what to do. Because if you're getting all of your news from, you know, sensationalist websites, you're probably going to have a bad day. Know what you have, right? This is kind of comes back to that threat and risk concept. Know what's on your network. Know what you have facing the internet. Understand, you know, what are your open ports? Are you running SE Linux on something? What are the technologies you're using? You need to understand this. We all operate in environments that are insanely complex. My favorite example is I was talking to some of the guys in the partner pavilion earlier, and you know, they said, oh, our server runs on Windows. And I go, oh, Windows? And they go, yeah, I know, of all places. But I said, you know, honestly, even Red Hat doesn't run all Red Hat. It's a reality of the universe we live in. We all have crazy stuff. Know what you have, though, because if you don't, you're going to get in trouble. The management tools are a big deal, obviously. We have things like Satellite on our end. I know there's various other products. Know what your management tools are. Know how to use them, because you can use those to your advantage when it comes time to apply patches. We need to understand, is something running this? We have tools like the new Satellite can do SCAP scanning, which is an easy way to do some inspection of your running RHEL systems and know it's there. You can look for, you know, do I have unpatched security issues that I need to think about? And so that's kind of an easy one. And then, of course, there's a Labs and Insights is coming out, which is going to give us some power there in terms of kind of that management angle, knowing what's going on. Excuse me. And practice, right? Practice is a big one. I know this is something I thought was dumb a couple of years ago, where I had an old security guy was talking about doing his tabletop exercises. And I thought, that sounds like the dumbest waste of time I've ever heard of. But in reality, if you don't know what you're going to do when an emergency comes, you're going to be in trouble. Because I'm sure you've all seen it. When something goes crazy, everyone starts running around on fire, right? It's just madness. No one knows what's going on. You've got two people doing the same thing, and they end up ruining the work of each other. And don't do that, right? Sit down with your leaders and practice. Let's say a critical issue comes out tomorrow. What's the first thing we do? Who do we call? What's going on? Who's responsible for what? How do we make sure things get done? How do we make sure we don't miss things? And so this is something, it sounds dumb, but trust me, it is not a waste of your time. And I'd highly suggest you do something about that. Talk to us, right? Things are difficult. I see security, I compare it to a vaccine, right? Herd immunity. If everyone has bad security, we're all screwed. But if most of us have decent security, things can get better, right? This is where Red Hat, we've got our support folks. The email address there is secalert@redhat.com. That is the mail queue for the product security team. You can mail those guys, and they'll talk to you, try to set you straight, answer your questions. It's humans. You will not get a response from a machine if you mail that. The support's the same way. Call support, you get a human. You don't have to worry about trying to deal with, you know, the annoying robots. And tell us what matters, right? We have piles of stuff in things like Red Hat Enterprise Linux, right? And it's how you guys run your business. But we don't always know what's important to everybody. We do what we think is best, and we try very hard to understand what's going on. But if there's something we're not addressing that you guys are concerned about, you know, let us know. Let's figure out what's going on. The stat there, it's 6% of CVE-IDs were exploited. That was last year. So basically, of all the CVE-IDs, there are, I think, 7,000 and change last year. Only 6% were ever actually exploited that we know of on the internet. And these weren't all Red Hat CVEs, mind you. But this is just throughout the whole universe. And so obviously, not everything is super duper important, right? And so help us understand the things that really matter, because those are the things we're going to give priority to and make sure that we're doing a good job and making sure that it's as secure as it can be. And obviously, if nothing else, you know, let me know. My Twitter handle, my email address. I'm happy to talk to anyone who wants to talk about it. One of the things I'm doing for security product management at Red Hat now is I need to understand what customers are doing. What's your risk? What are your use cases? Where are you guys having trouble? What can we do to help? What sort of features do we need? What sort of messages? Is our messaging good? You know, there's a million things to do. And so, yeah, by all means, you know, reach out to me. I'd love to talk to you and have a chat about all this stuff, because it's important, right? It's easy to sit here and talk about security, but at the end of the day, you know, I'm just a talking head. I need you guys to help us out. We need to make sure we're all working together, because we're all going to the same place. And then the next one. It's always, I remember, I don't think they do it anymore. When I was a kid, there was always talk of California having the big one is coming, right, for the earthquake. That's kind of what I feel like for these security issues. is they're the big ones coming. And we're going to always say that. And security people, we kind of like to cry wolf a lot, which I think why no one paid attention to us before. Now they kind of are, so we're still crying wolf a bit. But and additionally, I can say the next one's coming. Someday I'll be right, you know. But regardless, there's some things we kind of need to think about. So there's going to be more issues. Some will have names. Some of them won't have names. There's going to be more breaches. Some of you are going to be breached, and some of you are breached now, and you might not know it. And so that's something you need to think about. It's always the not if, but when, right, in terms of breaches and security issues and the big ones and whatnot. And so, unfortunately, that's what's going to happen. But we're ready, right? This is something Red Hat's been preparing for. We've been preparing for it for a very long time. And now we're to a point where I think we're, quite frankly, we're in really good shape, right? We've got teams. If we needed to spin up teams to deal with a critical issue tonight, it would happen. It would. Granted, I would be very grumpy, but it would happen, right? We have people ready to do this stuff, and they're there in a moment's notice. We have, you know, luckily with the planet being round, we've got people 24/7 waiting to do this stuff. Excuse me. But additionally, things are changing, and so we need to understand what that's going to mean for us going forward. Containers, I mentioned containers. You know, you've got your very specific use cases. We can start figuring what that means. Bring your own device. How many of you have situations where you've got your users connecting to your network with what is essentially an untrusted device, something they own, right? I'm sure we all do. And so that changes the rules. I mean, what does that mean? Some of us have networks now that don't even have perimeters. We need to understand what's going to happen with that. And it changes all the rules. It's exciting and it's terrifying because there's nothing I'd love more than to just tell everybody, no, we have our firewall, we have our perimeter, and you can't do anything with it. But of course, that isn't going to work. None of us will stay in business very long. The cloud, that's been around for a while now, and we're all starting to hopefully figure out what that means. It's difficult. Is it safe to run your infrastructure on someone else's hardware? I can't answer that question. I think it's the sort of thing that Red Hat's working on making it better. Management tools are obviously an important part of that. Internet of Things. Who can't wait till the refrigerator can hack the rest of their house and listen in on what's going on? That's going to be exciting. Unfortunately, the Internet of Things terrifies me a little bit because when you're dealing with a device that costs a couple of dollars, they're not going to want to do a lot of security updates to that device. And so we need to understand what that's going to mean in the big picture. And of course, I don't have any answers. I'm not going to lie. However, it is something we are investigating. It's something we should have an answer to in the very near future is my hope. Shadow IT, what that means is how many of you guys have found out that you had users, say, running things in Amazon's cloud and wasn't technically part of your IT department, right? There's a story I saw where I think it was a CFO at a company, happened to notice they sure were buying a lot of books from Amazon lately, right? And it turned out they were paying for hosting. It's just that no one was saying anything, and they just kept charging more and more and running more and more hardware in Amazon's cloud. And of course, the people paying the bills just assumed they were buying stuff, not compute power. And so, these are things that we're going to figure out what it means. We're going to figure out how to work best with you guys and what to do about it. And then, of course, are you ready? I don't know. Only you can answer that. But if you have more questions, there are some product security folks downstairs. There's Mark Cox is in the back. I see him now playing on his phone. Oh, yeah, now you got to pay attention. So he has some coffee cups, actually, that they're handing out downstairs. So I guess you have, what, 35 you said? So the first 35 people who mob Mark get a coffee cup. There's more downstairs, though. Go talk to the guys. They've got a little card game you can play and talk about some of these security issues. Bright guys, fun to talk to. I highly recommend it. Dan Walsh is up here. He has coloring books. Do you have the container and SE Linux or just SE Linux? Okay, so you got 2 coloring books, which is exciting. And I guess, you guys have any questions? I know I've eaten up most of my time, but I got a few minutes here. Oh, it's totally virtual. And inside Red Hat, we have a combination of email and IRC. And the members are whoever needs to be in the group for whatever's going on, which is part of what makes Red Hat cool, is the QE guys will be there, the docs guys will be there, we'll have developers get sucked in, you got security people getting sucked in, communications people get sucked in. It's just, whoever's needed. I mean, if we need lawyers in it, they're going to come. I mean, that's just how it'll be, which, again, I don't think anyone else would necessarily like that. But, you know, whatever, again, when an emergency happens, everyone's a security person. And so we do what needs to be done, because at the end of the day, it's really about keeping you guys safe more than anything else, right? It's not, our goal isn't to have good PR here. Our goal is to just actually do what's right, and then we get our good message from that, so. I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question. Can you?
Do you think eliminating static user accounts like root is a good security measure?
The question was, is eliminating standard user accounts like root a good security measure? I don't think you can get rid of root. I'm fairly certain that that won't happen. I mean, we could discuss this a lot. Dan, do you have any thoughts on, I mean, you don't want too many users. You need to control what's going on. But I think having just the user on the system isn't necessarily the risk. It's the daemon or the application using the user that is what you need to think about. And again, I'm going to say containers here is my magic solution to everything. But you know, once we have something like containers, we can more easily confine people into their own little silo and not have to worry so much about all this stuff kind of bleeding over into each other. Okay, the question was, he knows how to patch his RHEL systems, but how do we patch in a container world? And do we have a good answer for that today, Dan? I don't think we kind of do. All right. Okay, yeah, that's fair. Perfect. All right, the answer is to listen to Dan in the next session. All right.
You talked a bit about security, people who research security vulnerabilities. Does Red Hat spend time actually researching vulnerabilities as opposed to reacting to?
Okay, so the question was, does Red Hat spend time researching vulnerabilities? And I wouldn't say we have an official team that does it, but we do have people that will look at things like they might see something fishy and then they'll investigate it, or something new might come out. We'll do code analysis on new things. We'll do audits. We'll fuzz things as part of testing. Obviously, the QE guys find stuff all the time. And so what were we, Mark? 20% of security issues we fixed were found by Red Hat last year? Mark's not paying attention. I believe it was 20% though, where yeah, we have people. And some of them are specifically looking, some of them find them by accident. But yeah, we've got people doing that sort of stuff. Yeah.
Kind of in the spirit of, well, I guess this is feedback or a request or something like that, but kind of in the spirit of, one of your slides said, you know what you have and not everything is important. One of the challenges that I've repeatedly encountered with, particularly with kernel updates, I get the email, I read it, and I say, oh, there's a CVE, and there's kind of a little description, and it often says something like, applications that are able to change the blah blah flag on this socket, something like this, or that use this kernel subsystem, whatever it is. Those details are not necessarily meaningful to me.
That's probably a fair comment. Right.
Whether I care about this or not. But I suspect in our environment, we end up deploying a lot of kernel updates and rebooting a lot of machines that we really wouldn't need to if we were.
That is really quite possible.
And so where I'm going with this is, I don't know if this is feasible at all, but it would be awesome from my
Sure, that's not unreasonable at all. And I'm going to tell Mark and Sam to write that down, and then we'll see what we can do, I guess.
It's a hard request to state, but
I understand what you're saying, though, right? Some of these issues are very, and again, though, this is one of the problems with security, right? Is we understand the issue perfectly. Why don't you? And it's difficult sometimes to express what's going, because these are complicated and hard problems. And so, no, I mean, that's quite reasonable, I think.
aren't in a position to give a 100% up or down.
Right. I'd love to say absolutely we'll have it done tomorrow, but that isn't. We will work on it. Is what I'll say. Okay.
Talking about, we've talked about all kinds of stacks, right? I mean, you've got from just your standard rel server to platform to whatever. Even knowing how broad a stack is covered by a given vulnerability. I mean, I've learned terms here that, oh wow, I have no clue about that particular piece that's 5 levels below me. And so scoping, I don't know.
Okay. I mean, yeah, that's quite reasonable. I don't disagree. Sure. Any other questions? All right, guys. Thank you much. I appreciate you coming out.